world of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. It's the David Knight Show.
As the clock strikes 13, it's Tuesday, the 24th of March, year of our Lord 2026. Well, we have Trump doing a taco and saying he's going to give the Iranians another 5 days because they're having very productive talks, and the Iranians are saying, "You talking to me? We're not talking." That's what they said. Who do we believe at this point? Well, we have a Wall Street Journal former editor who says Donald Trump has become Baghdad Bob. He says it's a sad situation when the Iranians are more credible than your own president. That's the former Wall Street Journal editor. And we're going to take a look at the corruption as well. We have a massive, mysterious trade, buying into the stock market going up and oil going down that happened 5 minutes before Trump's announcement. And we have a refinery in the U.S. that has been apparently blown up. They said there was an explosion. I don't know if it was natural or bomb. It's not usual. This happened in Port Arthur, Texas. We'll be taking a look at all that, as well as Mark Levin coming after Joe Kent. Yeah, the APAC knives are out, aren't they? We'll be right back. Well, we have Donald Trump has done his typical taco dance. Here is his statement that he put up on Ministry of Truth Social, saying they're having very productive talks, that he has instructed the Department of War to postpone any and all military strikes against Iranian power plants and energy, subject to the success of the ongoing meetings and discussions. So he's trying to pull back. Now, many people question what is happening with this Port Arthur. Of course, the MAGA people are jumping into it saying, "We're at war," as if we weren't at war before. But we're going to take a look at that. Meanwhile, this is Trump, his official announcement. Pleased to report that the United States of America and the country of Iran have, over the last 2 days, had very good and productive conversations. And they are pushing back on that and saying that is not happening at all. As a matter of fact, if we look at what Trump is telling everybody, this is what it's looked like for the last couple of days. First of all, on March 20th, Trump says, "We don't use the strait. We don't need it." Yeah, well, it's like 20% of the world's oil is going through there. You might have thought about that before, but now it's a big problem. The next day, the very next day, March the 21st, if Iran doesn't fully open this within 48 hours, we're going to blow up the Mideast. We're going to set all the refineries on fire and so forth, and because that is what Iran said they're going to do. If you come after our infrastructure, we're going to go after everybody else's infrastructure. And they're serious about it, unlike Trump. They put out a list of what they would attack, a very long list. Meanwhile, as Trump is putting out this announcement on March 21st, actually, he puts that announcement out, and then just before he put out his postponement announcement, as I said, 5 minutes before, you had somebody put a $1.5 billion bet on stocks going up. They bought into the major stock index, I think it was the Dow or something like that. And then they put in a short sell order on oil, betting it would go down, put in $192 million on oil. But they put $1.5 billion bet on stocks. This is all done 5 minutes before Trump makes his announcement. Does anybody know what Don Jr. and Eric, or maybe even Barron, were doing at that point in time? Can we establish their whereabouts at that point in time? How about Lucky Lutnick or Scott Bessent? This looks like an inside job, doesn't it? As a matter of fact, speaking of inside jobs, we have, I gave this to you at the last minute. Do you have a video of the Port Arthur fire? Can you play that? I don't know where that is on the deck, if it's there in the deck. But there was this is a Valero refinery in Port Arthur, Texas, the reports that there was an explosion, and people said, oh, well, look, we're at war. Interesting that people said there was a spike in search activity for Port Arthur, Texas, in Israel, March the 17th. You can go back and look it up on Google Analytics yourself. March 17th, there's a surge in Israel for this particular. Why would they be searching Port Arthur, Texas, all of a sudden? And then this happens. Would this be in Israel's advantage? Because now, after there's a refinery attack here in the United States, the people who were reluctant to support Trump because they didn't want a war, the people who voted for him because he said they wouldn't get a war, now we're at war, says MAGA. As I said before, where is our false flag attack? Usually they have the courtesy of giving us a false flag attack before they start their wars of aggression. This time we didn't get it. Not before. And many people said, we'll get it afterwards. We'll get it with a false flag attack afterwards. As his support for the war is dying, we'll have some kind of an attack afterwards. Well, this very well may be it. And so CNN is telling you about the millions of people that have been killed in the vaccine issues that Trump has done. They say thousands of people have been killed in the Middle East since this conflict began. They conveniently ignore all the people that were killed in the previous war against America, and that would be the COVID war. Some people are noticing the similarities between these two things. You know, there's a lot of similarities between the Iran war that we're now at and the Iraq war that we had, and how we got lied into it. Statements made by the presidents, George W. Bush and Trump, statements made by the Secretaries of Defense, Rumsfeld and Hegseth. There's an amazing similarity there. There's also an amazing similarity in terms of what we were told when they came to war against us with COVID and what they're doing right now. They just keep pulling the same things over on us over and over again. And you can't blame them because it works every single time. It's almost amusing, except it's not really amusing. And so here we are yet again. CNN is not going to tell you about the millions of people that were killed with the ventilators and the remdesivir and the fact that Trump paid them to do it. He paid the hospitals to kill people. They're not going to tell you about the millions that were killed worldwide when he rolled out his mRNA genetic code injection. And the people are still dying with long-term effects, still dying with myocarditis, pericarditis, turbo cancer, many other issues like that. And so when you look at what Trump and Netanyahu have done in terms of the mass murderers of the 21st century, you know, we had the mass murderers of the 20th century, people like Stalin and Mao and Hitler. Now in the 21st century, the people who are the reigning champions so far are Trump and Netanyahu. Now you look at Iran, Lebanon, Israel. You have also Americans who were killed because of this Iran war. Oman, Kuwait, Saudi, Bahrain, Qatar, West Bank, Iraq, UAE. Those are all countries where people have died because of this Israeli war against Iran that we joined in with. And also Americans who died in this. And they want more blood. They're not satisfied with it yet. Not nearly as many has been killed and are still dying with the mRNA bioweapon. But hey, they're just getting started. You know, we can always do better, right? And when you look at what is happening again in Lebanon, Israel is just getting started. Here's a clip of what they just pulled yesterday. Here they are blowing up an entire area. Look at that. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, this is Israeli video. They like that. You had one guy who dedicated it to his wife, Sarah. He says, watch this. And he blows up a bunch of people. It's amazing how they have embraced the killing. Iran says that talks with the U.S. are fake news after Trump threatened to just keep bombing. We're just going to keep bombing. We don't really have any plan, right? We're just going to keep bombing. Well, Evidently, we haven't learned much in the last 60 some odd years. As a matter of fact, Colonel Douglas McGregor talked about that, the futility of just continuing to bomb. We've got all these targets, and he says, these guys rattling this stuff off. It sounds like an accountant reading from a spreadsheet. How many targets did we hit and how many bombs did we drop? He said, I've seen this all before.
Meantime, the Iranians, who always knew this was coming, just as I said it, and many other people said it, had spent the last 20 years putting together a way to survive it. And that has been their goal, to survive the inevitable onslaught of American military power. And they've done it. And not only have they survived it, but they've managed to strike back very decisively against their opponents. And they have punished everyone and anyone who worked with, supported, or cooperated with the United States and Israel. So right now, the Iranians, despite all the damage that they've taken, and they have taken substantial damage inside their country, is actually in a very strong position. We, on the other hand, that have made all these strident, ill-advised demands and silly remarks, are sitting around trying to figure out what we are going to do next. We boast about destroying the Iranian Air Force. Well, the Iranians have not had an Air Force to speak of since the Shah left, just as insignificant. Yeah. And as far as the Navy is concerned, well, we sank the 7 frigates that were the backbone of the Navy. We're dealing with small boats, and we seem to think that that's a significant achievement. And I was listening to General Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, read from what sounded like a spreadsheet from an accountant and tell us about all the sorties that have been flown and all the thousands of places we've struck and dropped bombs, as though this was a metric for success. We've learned nothing since 1965. We went through this in Vietnam. I remember as a young man listening in 1969, 70, 71 to similar officers in uniform stand there and tell us, well, today we flew this many sorties and we dropped these many bombs and this much tonnage. And the entire time we were doing this, we were losing the war. Nobody seemed to understand that until it was too late.
Robert McNamara.
I think now we are genuinely in a state of confusion. And I think that President Trump, as you point out, very definitely is looking for an off-ramp. The problem is no one's going to give it to him. He can't get it. And the Iranians are in no hurry to end this because they are winning.
Yeah, that whole, the body count stuff, the bomb counts, the target counts, all the rest of that stuff. I remember hearing that as well. I wasn't in the military, but you heard it on the news all the time, just like you hear War Pete and Dan Kane rattling off all this stuff. You don't have to be in the military to hear that. And you don't have to be in the military to understand. Evidently, the military does not understand the reality that that doesn't win wars. We've seen this happen before. This is a hangover from Robert McNamara, the whiz kid. He was supposed to be so smart. And I think all of this spreadsheet bombing campaign is simply a hangover from that, but it's not working. Hasn't worked in all these different wars. And so Trump has announced that there are now productive talks with Iran. And so for that reason, he's going to postpone the military strikes for 5 days. Iran's foreign ministry, meanwhile, and the parliamentary speaker says there have been no talks. No talks have happened at all. So who are you going to believe? You're going to believe the guy who continues to lie to us about everything, which is Trump, or you're going to believe the people that we are at war with? Israel is not seeing an imminent end to the war, and they plan to continue operations. As a matter of fact, as Trump announced, well, we're not going to bomb Iran now for 5 days. We're not going to go after their power infrastructure. So don't go down that list of sites that you had. And they did. They put out a list of several different countries, and they were very specific about what they were going to target. And so as Trump is putting this out, saying, well, we've had really productive talks, and so we're going to hold off for a while. As he's doing it, Israel steps up the bombing. And some people have said, well, it's the good cop, bad cop stuff. But it's also the fact that Israel is driving this stuff. It's not Trump. And he's operating from a position of weakness. The owner-donor of this war is Israel, even though we are providing massive amounts of money to their defense, they're not going to listen to us. And that's one of the things that Joe Kent has pointed out. He said, look, it's not like we don't have any leverage with them. They're very dependent on the U.S. for money and for weapons. And you just say to them, look, you either do what we say or we're not going to cut that off. What's so hard about that? Well, what is so hard about it is the fact that we now have the Zionist government in Israel that owns our government. There's no question about it now. It's all out in the open. The IEA executive director, the International Energy Association, has warned of 1970s level oil shocks. He says no country will be immune to the effects of this crisis. And, when I look at this, I see all these articles about how the United States is in this race with Qatar over natural gas. Who's going to be the biggest natural gas supplier to the world? And it was kind of neck and neck, right? And they were getting ready to have a big expansion. They were going to double the size of their production in the next few years by 2030. And yet, instead of that happening, that expansion has now been put on hold, and they have immediately been hit with this first round of attacks. They immediately lost 17%. So rather than doubling their capacity has gone down by 17%. Meanwhile, the U.S. is expanding, and unless the attacks from Israel continue on our refineries, they will take the lead in terms of production of natural gas. Is that good for America? It's not good for the consumer. I remember when all this stuff happened, and I remember we moved to Houston at the time. I was working for Texas Instruments, and the place was booming from 1980 to 1983. And everywhere else was really hanging on by their fingernails. But the oil areas were doing great around Houston. That was a major part of their economy. And you had a lot of people saying, well, everybody's saying this is being done to us by the Arabs and by OPEC. But OPEC is really Exxon, Mobil, and these other people, most of them who've now consolidated into even bigger companies now. But there were, the usual suspects, the big oil companies, just like the gigantic corporations. Everything that Trump does is for the advantage of the big corporations to the disadvantage of Main Street and the average American. We're the ones that always get the short end of the stick. When Trump talks about making America great again, what he's talking about is the big corporations on Wall Street. He wants to make Wall Street bigger and to make sure that Wall Street owns everything. And the way that you wind up owning everything, the way they fulfill their fantasy of you will own nothing, the World Economic Forum fantasy, the way they fulfill that is to make sure that they own the politicians. If they own the politicians, they will eventually own everything. And that's true whether you're talking about gigantic corporations or foreign governments. And so what are Trump's choices at this point? Well, a former NATO commander of the UK had this to say.
Trump faces two choices. He either doubles down, escalates, and launches an operation to topple the regime. And you're not going to do that without an extraordinary, massive land force marching on Tehran, which I think is inconceivable. The other alternative is Trump says, I've declared victory, I'm going to walk away from this. But that's not going to fool anyone. Trump will be humiliated in doing so.
That's right.
For all the
and
talk
of course,
ending this war,
Israel isn't going to let that happen either.
Escalates further. Joe Inwood, BBC News.
Israel will escalate their attacks just as they did when he put out that memo. They'll escalate their attacks on Iran. They'll do false flags here in America. They will not allow that to happen. So Trump evidently doubles down, insists that there have been talks, even as the Iranians deny it. And again, the question is, why would they, for example, the missile that they said was double the range of anything anybody believed that Iran had, a missile fired at Diego Garcia and missed, by the way. Why would they deny that? And why would it miss? Because they've been extremely accurate on everything else that they fired. Why would they deny that? Wouldn't they brag about that? Certainly War Pete would. Look at this. You thought we didn't have anything that could go that far? This goes twice as far as what you thought we could do. Why would they deny that? A lot of people have suspected that this was something that was done by Israel. Now, we don't have access to anybody who's watching this. Every country would know this. So that's a problem with that point of view. But I could certainly see that happen. And perhaps there is a conspiracy of silence. When you go back and you look at COVID, it's amazing how all these different countries operated in lockstep. They all really need to have a world war right now because they've all really gone to war with their own people for a very long time. If you look at this, I've never in my lifetime seen a situation so universal that in every country you can name, even developing countries, they have come against their own people to harm them, not just with the COVID stuff, with all the policies that they're doing. Everything they're doing is designed to destroy their own countries. We have a cabal of evil leaders that are suicidal in their leadership. It's like a Kool-Aid cult, a global Kool-Aid cult. And they know that people are going to come after them with the guillotines, as Bloomberg put it. And so what they have to do is find some way to pacify or to kill us first. That's why they did what they did in 2020, why they are looking to set up a global war and depression. Iran means business and they want to settle, and Trump stresses, we will get it done. I hope. Well, Goldman Sachs EU head of equity execution says, are we going to escalate to de-escalate? Trump's behavior over the past 72 hours follows a familiar pattern. Friday, he floats winding down. Saturday, he escalates to an extreme ultimatum. He signals willingness to exit, and then he has maximum leverage to extract a concession that he can frame as a win. Same playbook that he used in North Korea, 2017 to 18. Same playbook he used with Soleimani, 2020. Same playbook he used with tariffs with China. Escalate, create a deadline, then offer an off-ramp. This time, though, may be harder. Iran is likely to see the pattern and won't offer an easy concession. You can run these scams only so many times before some people catch on. MAGA is never going to catch on to anything. You can fool some of the people all the time. They're called MAGA, but other people eventually catch on. A decentralized Iran military makes negotiations structurally difficult as well. I'd like to know who he's talking to, right? He says he hasn't talked to the new Ayatollah. He doesn't know who the guy is or if he's still alive even, he said. And so who's in charge there? Do they even know? They claim to have taken out so many leaders. They said, yeah, some of the people that we wanted to talk to, some of the people we wanted to take over in regime change, we killed them. He also killed his chances of having that happen. If he would have stepped back and just let things happen internally rather than interfering. By interfering, what he did was he consolidated support with a very regime that he doesn't like. And he poisoned any opportunity for there to be a rapprochement between the U.S. and Iran after 73 years of us initiating attacks against them. Meanwhile, we look at the status of U.S. troops. There's indications based on plane spotters that elements of the 82nd Airborne out of North Carolina, Fort Bragg, have arrived in the Middle East via cargo flights. And the USS Gerald Ford will be replaced by the USS H.W. Bush. Again, the Gerald Ford is the one that had, first of all, the backed up septic system, and people said had been sabotaged by people who were angry about the long tour of duty that they had. Then there were onboard fires that burned a lot of the bunks. There are questions as to whether that was internal or external with an attack. I believe it was internal. And I said, that's an even worse scenario. If it's a kind of a mutinous rebellion against what is happening there, that's even worse than an attack from the outside. Iran confirmed no talks with the U.S. Again, saying fake news as they have launched more missiles on Israel. This is one of the reasons why we don't trust Trump. One of the reasons why you have people, even in the establishment media, saying that he's Baghdad Bob, with good reason. Because as they tell us that they have eliminated their air defenses, they hit an F-35. As they tell us they've taken out all the missile launching facilities, they continue to escalate. And when you look at it, some people said, look at how the number of missiles has really dropped. The people who were looking at this, like Colonel McGregor said, well, the reason there was a big surge at the very beginning was because they were using up the missile systems, wanted to consume those pretty rapidly because they knew we had a limited number of those. So they sent out their older missiles. And even with the older missiles, these the Iron Dome and these Patriot batteries and that type of thing, they have to use 2 to 3 of their very expensive missiles to try to stop an incoming missile. And so it was a question of attrition, who was going to run out of supplies and ammunition first. And it appears that we have now at this point. And so now they're bringing in their more advanced missiles. And so they're doing fewer of them, but they're doing more damage. The big surge at the very beginning was to consume the anti-ballistic missiles. So ministry spokesperson said they'd had no talks with the U.S. They said in recent days, friendly countries have sent messages indicating U.S. requests to talk to end the war, but Iran did not respond, said their statement. Previously, Iranian officials have made clear they want to improve more costs on their attackers, huge direct confirmation of Iran's rejection and denial. So from what they see, it certainly looks consistent with what Iran is saying. From what we see, it looks very inconsistent with what Trump and Hegseth are saying. No negotiations have been held with the U.S., and it's fake news to manipulate the financial and oil markets, and somebody made a lot of money doing that, and to escape the quagmire in which the U.S. and Israel are trapped, said the Iranian statement. The Iranian Guard further announced fresh missile launches on Israel. Also, the Financial Times reports on further mediation efforts. Pakistan steps up as a go-between in Trump's Iran crisis. You know, Russia has been there, and it'd be interesting if if Russia gets a peace prize for this and Trump doesn't, right? They're not going to give Russia a peace prize because of Ukraine. But we're in a situation where Trump wanted to present himself as a mediator when Ukraine was our surrogate, in a sense. And although Iran is not their surrogate, they were not the aggressor. We started the war. Nevertheless, Russia is allied with Iran and providing them with intelligence. So for Russia to come in as a mediator for Iran with the U.S. and Israel is about as absurd as us being the mediator for Ukraine with Russia. And so when you look at what these various people are saying, as I pointed out, it's McGregor wrote this on a Substack. He said, Netanyahu's delusions have become Trump's reality. The White House is now struggling to respond to the worst-case scenario that no one seems to have considered: defeat and an accompanying global recession. These twin outcomes are fast becoming a reality. As I said before, you're going to wind up seeing Trump as the Jimmy Carter of the GOP. He is going to be a swear word in the not-too-distant future because of the getting us into an unpopular war. He didn't even bother to build consensus. I mean, why? You know, he doesn't need to have permission from the law, from the Constitution, from the people. He doesn't care about any of that stuff. He can do what he wants. We've heard this over and over again. And so, as a matter of fact, when you look at him and his boasting about the next war that he's going to get us into, it truly is amazing just how evil the guy is. And somebody put together a clip. I don't know, do we have that in here anymore? Yeah, there it is. Somebody put together a clip as he was asked a question about Cuba, and he's saying, yeah, Cuba's next. I can do anything I want. I'm going to take Cuba. You know, I get the honor of doing that. What somebody did was they kept the audio. They used the original clip as him moving, and they changed him into Dr. Evil from Austin Powers.
Peter?
When you say Cuba is next.
Cuba. I do believe I'll be having the honor of
That's perfect.
taking Cuba. That's a big honor.
Taking Cuba.
Taking Cuba in some form, yeah. Taking Cuba. I mean, whether I free it, take it, I think I could do anything I want with it. You want to know the truth? They're a very weakened nation right now.
Isn't that perfect? He makes a great Dr. Evil. He just, nobody needs writing dialogue for him. It just comes natural to him. And so Trump says, we just spoke to Israel a little while ago. Israel will be very happy with what we have on Iran, he said. And of course, that's all that matters, right? Nobody else matters except for his owner donors. Does he make the corporations happy? Does he make Israel happy? That's all that matters. What happens to you and me? What happens to America? What happens to Main Street, small business, mom and pop shops? That doesn't matter at all. He has nothing but contempt for small business. He's only concerned about Wall Street, about the stock market, about the big donors. He's exactly like Hillary Clinton. I'll never forget when Hillary Clinton was pushing her takeover of healthcare, Clinton Care, back in the early 90s. And she said, I can't be bothered. Everybody was saying, you're going to put all these small businesses out of business with your mandates. They can't afford this. Said, I can't be bothered with every undercapitalized small business that's out there. Utter contempt. Trump hasn't said that yet, but he did it with his actions in 2020. He's doing it yet again. So when Trump was asked about Iranian media denying talks with the U.S., he said, the talks have involved Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner and their counterparts, adding a deal with Iran would be reached in 5 days or sooner. Do you think these two Zionist real estate dealers have any credibility with the Iranians? How stupid would they have to be? These special envoys for war that he's got there. Perfidy and treachery. That's what you're going to get from Witkoff and Kushner. Oman's foreign minister said the conflict with Iran is not of their making, not of Iran's making. It's not of Oman's making either. Oman tried to stop this from happening, and it was Oman who said, made the very quick trip to the U.S. to try to head off war and said, look at what they've agreed to. It's amazing what they've agreed to. And they launched anyway, because it's only about making Israel happy. It's already causing major economic disruption. He said, whatever your view of Iran, this is not a war of their making. You are the aggressor. Iran state media cast Trump as in retreat, who warns the U.S. just can keep bombing, right? Yeah, we can just keep running those spreadsheets out there. We don't have to worry about any cost accounting of it. And, if you got a quota in terms of the number of targets that you've got to hit, just like ICE, we've seen what quotas do. It's no different than if you got the Tennessee Highway Patrol and they've got a quota of drunk drivers they got to arrest. So you got the one guy who's arrested like 50 people that weren't drunk at all. Because they got quotas, they're going to go out there and fill them, right? And so that happens when they're talking about cops coming after speeders or drunk drivers that start coming after people who are not guilty, and see the same thing happening then with ICE. And now we see the same thing happening with these targets. And of course, Palantir and the people who were picking the targets for them, if you want to have a discussion about the targeting of that girls' school, you need to have a discussion about Palantir and about AI targeting. But they're going to double down on that as well. Iran's foreign ministry made it clear that there is no dialogue between Tehran and Washington, despite Trump's early Monday assertion that the discussions over the weekend were productive. We haven't even talked to him, they said. Yes, there are initiatives from regional countries, as I said, but nobody in Washington. So this feels very similar to Trump's tariff playbook. And it's not just the guy at Goldman that was saying that. This is coming from Crossbridge Capital. The people have been watching what he did with tariffs. So it looks exactly like the same thing. First of all, you delay. Then you make demands. Then after you made the demands, you create some optionality. You give people some options to choose. Then ultimately you step back. So yeah, it's chaos. And it's no real plan. It's just, let's throw this out there against the wall and see what happens. The tremendous amount of damage that Trump has already done globally to economies around the world is a one-man recession with his tariffs. He's a one-man depression with this oil situation. It's naive to assume that the situation will be resolved to the satisfaction of all the main combatants and the victims of hostilities, said a Bloomberg macro strategist, Simon White. Said further negative effects from higher energy prices are now baked in. There's an abundance of potential pitfalls remaining ahead. Yeah, even if they were to stop everything at this point, the increase in energy prices are going to go on and on and on for quite some time. The drone war is going to drone on and on and on. Israel strikes more than a mere hour after Trump announced the U.S. halt. Again, a murderous regime. They're not going to be satisfied with anything less than a complete Gaza-cide. Yeah, that's what we should start calling it. We can stop arguing about genocide, just call it Gaza-cide. Isn't that bad enough? Israel is the problem. Netanyahu doesn't care about the death even of his own people. Just like he didn't care about their deaths during COVID. He was more than happy during COVID to sacrifice his people to Pfizer, even offered to use them as guinea pigs. Give it to us first, and we'll give you all the data. So this is what is happening in Dimona. This is one city that surprised them because they had quite a bit of defensive batteries there, anti-ballistic missiles. And nevertheless, those did not work. And they had them there because that's the town where they are doing most of their nuclear research. This is another picture of it coming in there. It's amazing to see these things coming at the ground level. You see them briefly from a distance, and all of a sudden you get a sense of just how rapidly these things are traveling. When it starts to get close, it seems like it even accelerates. But of course, with their dancing missile stuff, if that's what it is, they can change the speed of the missile as well as the direction. It makes it so hard for them to be shot down, especially when you are running low on anti-ballistic missiles. And then that was Dimona. This is what Tel Aviv looked like. Look at that. Truly is amazing. This is the destruction that Netanyahu is unleashing on his own people. We should always remember that. It's not just the, people see this, they generally coalesce around the person who has created this problem. When you have civilian bombing campaigns, that's the natural reaction to do that. But there's the aftermath of it. But you don't ever blame the person. If they are the aggressor, certainly they're the one to blame. Should the people in German cities that got destroyed, should they blame Hitler? Yeah. Should these people blame Netanyahu? Absolutely. Iran's Supreme Defense Council threatened to deploy various types of naval mines across the Persian Gulf if its coasts or islands are attacked. Again, they have the capability to escalate. And they keep warning, if you keep attacking us, we're going to escalate. And of course, Israel keeps attacking. Because what Israel wants at this point is they want to Gaza-cide every one of the Gulf states. They want the entire Middle East set fire and burned down. So they can come in like the vultures that they are and try to steal it. Iran's affiliated news agency said, in the case of the slightest attack on the electricity infrastructure of our Islamic Republic, the entire region will go dark. And they put out a long list of specific locations. And these are refineries and ports and oil sites that cannot really be defended. And so they give lists of places in Saudi Arabia, a gas power plant, a major oil and gas facility. And they are very specific. They'll say the village near Al-Kabar, whatever, and a gas power plant. And they even talk about the amount of power generation that it does. So this is a very specific list. That's 2 sites in Saudi Arabia. In the UAE, they've got, 3 sites, a solar park, a solar power plant, a gas power, and a desalination complex in another town, and a nuclear power plant in another town. That's the UAE. Then you go to Qatar, and they're talking about Ras Laffan again, the gigantic gas power plant they've already hit once. And then another gas and desalination plant there in Qatar. In Kuwait, they mentioned an oil and gas power plant. In another location, a combined cycle power plant. and then an energy park that is solar and wind. Take out the solar and wind. How about that? It's not just the petrochemical stuff. The Hormuz crisis could surpass the oil shocks of the 1970s. Of course, because at that point in time, as I pointed out, the U.S. was the only one that was affected, and that was in 1973. It was a much, much smaller percentage. All of our imported oil in 1973 was only 19%. This is 20% of the world's energy. And so it was just a small portion of what we were importing, and what we were importing was less than that. And then you have the knock-on effects of fertilizer, of helium that is used for semiconductor manufacturing, of pharmaceuticals even. Not that I would miss any of that. The head of the International Energy Agency said the global economy faces a major threat, quote unquote. No country will be immune to the effects of this crisis if it continues to go in this direction. The crisis in the Middle East has had a worse impact on oil than the two oil shocks of the 1970s combined, he said, and a worse effect on gas than the Russian-Ukraine war. And so, again, it is Gerard Baker, who was the former Wall Street Journal editor-in-chief, who called Donald Trump Baghdad Bob. You can't think of a better analogy for a liar. I remember the one video where he's out there saying there are no American tanks inside of Baghdad and blah, blah, blah. He's denying all this stuff. And they cut over to a reporter who was talking to a couple of American military guys, a couple of servicemen. They said, yeah, we see him. He's right over there. Maybe we should go over and introduce ourselves to him. I mean, the U.S. military and their tanks are standing right there while he is telling everybody they're not there. And that's exactly what we're seeing from Trump. And so when we look at this trade, let's look at that trade that happened. This is reported yesterday afternoon. This is the massive amount of volume in stock and oil futures that surged just minutes before Trump's market-turning post. You know, that's one of the things, when we look at this, everybody says, oh, that's his negotiating tactic. Could it be that Trump is the most openly corrupt president we have ever had? I remember when I grew up in Tampa, there was a restaurant there, a Spanish restaurant that was very famous. And they would, there was a program that they would support. There was, we would watch it, we'd watch high school football. They'd have the clips and they'd have the summary of high school football in the evening. So we'd watch it with a bunch of friends and everything. And then they would, they had this guy who was the weather forecaster, and he dressed up like Frankenstein and gave the introduction to some old horror film, like from the 1930s, one of the Universal monster movies or whatever. And he had the station's numbers on his jersey, Channel 13, and he was Armstrong, the All-American Ghoul, and he would, he was kind of like the role that they had Elvira in years later, but he would do that. And the sponsor for that particular program, they would always watch the old 1930s horror film after we'd watch the high school reports and games and stuff like that as a group. And because we'd already gone to the football game that evening. And so this restaurant would always have a commercial as a sponsor. They would be the first commercial. And the guy who was the owner of the restaurant, salute and a happy day number, and he'd give out a series of numbers. And people would say, what is that about? There was never any explanation, but they figured out he was doing a numbers game. And that's kind of what Trump is doing with these moves on tariffs and stock markets and wars and everything else. He's throwing out this stuff, playing the market in the background and manipulating it. So we see S&P 500 futures and oil futures flashed an unusual burst of activity early Monday, minutes before a market-moving social media post from President Trump. At around 6:50 a.m. in New York, S&P 500 and E-mini futures trading on the CME recorded a sharp and isolated jump in volume, breaking from an otherwise subdued pre-market backdrop. With thin liquidity typical of early trading hours, because the market doesn't really open, I think, until, is it 9 a.m.? I don't know. The sudden burst stood out as one of the largest volume moments of the session up to that point. A similar pattern was observed in oil markets. West Texas Intermediate May futures also saw a noticeable pickup in trading activity at roughly the same time, with a distinct volume spike interrupting otherwise quiet conditions. So they're going along, and all of a sudden these massive whale movements come in. Roughly 15 minutes later, at 7:05 a.m., some people reported it was 5 minutes, they're saying 15 minutes, Trump said on Ministry of Truth Social that the U.S. and Iran had held talks and that he was halting planned strikes on Iranian power plants and energy infrastructure. So you put out this doomsday scenario story, a threat. We're going to set the entire Middle East on fire. And then you walk that back and say, hey, not a problem. It's going really good. And we're going to have another talk for 5 days, but it's looking very, very positive. And just before you pull back your doomsday scenario, somebody, just a couple of minutes before it happens, somebody puts these massive bets in. $1.5 billion on the stock market bet and $192 million on the oil bet. That announcement prompted an instant rally in risk assets, with S&P 500 futures soaring more than 2.5% before the opening bell. Yeah, 2.5%. That's a nice amount of money on a $1.5 billion bet, isn't it? And so West Texas Intermediate futures then dropped nearly 6%. So they made 6% on their $192 million investment, 2.5% on their $1.5 billion investment. Whoever it is in the Trump administration that is making these corrupt moves is doing pretty well. I would expect after the midterm elections, somebody's going to be looking into that. I think there'll be a lot of investigation. There should be. Of course, nobody ever really looked into who it was making these massive bets on airlines and other stocks just before 9/11. Somebody had some inside advanced information about that as well. Shortly after the president fired off his post, the Iranian news agency reported, quote, there had been no direct or indirect contact between the two warring governments. It also asserted that Trump had, quote, backed down after the Iranians threatened to target, quote, all power plants in West Asia. The Iranian Foreign Ministry said the U.S. president's statements are within the framework of efforts to reduce energy prices and gain time to implement his military plans. There are initiatives by regional countries, as I said before, to try to de-escalate this stuff, but we have not talked to Washington, and we've told these other countries that we're not interested in talking to Washington. And so Gerard Baker, the guy who called him Baghdad Bob, said the unsettling reality is that this president, Americans in wartime, are in the unprecedented position of having to suspect that the enemy's version of events is more likely to be true than our own. We now have become Baghdad Bob. Well, it's absolutely true because we can see that what they're telling us in terms of, we've destroyed this, we've destroyed that, and then it turns out that's not true. This whole thing was predicated on a lie about how Trump had destroyed their entire nuclear program. And then he says, now we got to go back and have a war because they somehow built it back in a couple of months. Well, it's the same lies, but a new war. Trump and the Iraq playbook. This is from Reason. They said Trump's war in Iran has every bit as short-sighted and illegal as the one in Iraq that he once called a big, fat mistake. I realized that Trump was a big, fat mistake when he promoted the woman who sold those lies to Colin Powell, who produced those lies. She produced them with torture because, she doesn't want to just make it up. She wants to have some evidence that somebody said it, even if they said it under torture and duress. That's the way she covers herself. So they torture this guy and give him leading questions, tell him what to say. Then she takes that over to Colin Powell and gives it to him, and he pronounces that to the UN, and that becomes the basis of the war. Then Trump calls out this as lies. Everybody knew it was a lie at that point in time, but he was the only one in the Republican Party to say that. Everybody said, good, he's candid. He's going to tell us the truth about what's going on. Yeah, right. Then what did he do? As soon as he got in, he puts in Pompeo as head of the CIA. He puts in Gina Haspel, the person who sold the lies, as his number 2. I think she was effectively running the show at that point in time. But then Pompeo moves on, and she becomes the number 1 at the CIA. The person that produced the lies using torture and got us into Iraq became his number 1 person at the CIA. That tells you everything you need to know about Donald Trump, who owns him, who controls him, and how he is lying to everybody. I'm going to get rid of the CIA deep state. Well, he didn't. He joined forces with it. As a matter of fact, he promoted it. The war in Iraq was a big fat mistake, he said in the 2016 debate. George Bush made a mistake. We can make mistakes, but that one was a beauty, and we should never have been in Iraq. And he promotes the woman who did that. He said, and we have destabilized the Middle East. Well, this is much, much worse in terms of destabilizing the Middle East than the Iraq War was. It was refreshing for a major Republican candidate to acknowledge something that, despite being party heresy, was by then abundantly apparent to everyone, says Reason Magazine. And really, that's the way the CIA rolls, isn't it? They'll put somebody out there as controlled opposition, and they will say, look at what the CIA did. You know, they're awful, like Alex Jones did, right? And then when the time comes, they turn with the CIA because they were always set up to do that. That's exactly what we saw with Alex Jones. It's the con and the confidence game. They've got to get your confidence in a confidence game. At the outset, Trump boasted that the campaign would take 4 weeks or less. Iran cannot outlast us, said War Pete. You can say 4 weeks, but it could be 6, it could be 8, it could be 3. We set the pace. We set the tempo. Again, the braggadocio, as Reason points out, the empty, pretentious bragging and pretending, the cocky, swaggering Pete braggadocio. And then what was it that we heard from Donald Rumsfeld? Very similar, wasn't it? Donald Rumsfeld said, well, I can't tell you if the use of force in Iraq today would last 5 days or 5 weeks or 5 months, but it certainly isn't going to last any longer than that. Well, it didn't last 5 months. It lasted 8 years and 9 months. Yeah, 5 days, 5 weeks, 5 months. No, 8 years, 9 months. The current administration has insisted that it didn't have a choice. If we didn't hit within 2 weeks, they would have had a nuclear weapon, said Trump afterwards. This is exactly the same talking points. I've played the clip over and over again of Netanyahu, what he's been saying for 35 years. Trump said after the bombing in June of 2025 that it, quote, Iran's key nuclear facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Yet within just a few months, Iran had apparently rebuilt so much that it was only days away from having a nuclear weapon. Or the other alternative is that he was lying to us. Both times. This too echoes the Bush administration's case for war as advanced by Colin Powell, who said at the UN, he said, Saddam Hussein has chemical weapons. We have no indication that he has ever abandoned his nuclear weapons program either. On the contrary, we have more than a decade of proof that he remains determined to acquire nuclear weapons, based on the lies that were fed to him by Gina Haspel, that she obtained by torture. And then, again, John Kiriakou, who blew the whistle on it, he went to jail. She went to the head of the CIA, appointed by Trump. And, of course, nobody went to jail for the torture. Not even the psychologist who the CIA hired to do the torture. They were sued, and even that civil lawsuit was shut down. Nobody was punished except for the whistleblower. We're starting to see that same type of pattern developing with Joe Kent now that happened with John Kiriakou. America must not ignore the threat gathering against us, Bush warned at the time. He said, we have to take clear evidence of peril. We cannot wait for the final proof the smoking gun. The smoking gun could come in the form of a mushroom cloud, he said. It turned out, as we discovered later, that a lot of the sources that had been attested to by the intelligence community were wrong. Colin Powell later admitted. He said his testimony at the UN was a blot on his record. That's putting it mildly. I think it was a lot of blood on his record, actually. The U.S. should only ever go to war, says Reason, with the approval of Congress. And that after a full presentation of the facts to the American people and allowing people to question and to debate those facts. Trump, meanwhile, authorized military action in clear violation of the Constitution, selling a Middle East war with the same tired arguments that he once implicitly ran against. And that's a Reason's commentary, and of course they're right. You know, he ran against war because he knows that nobody wants the war. So the Israeli terror state is not going rogue, said one commenter on Twitter. This is their good cop, bad cop routine. Trump pretends to want to talk, and the Israeli terrorists attack in the meantime, lull the Iranians into complacency, and still wreak havoc and manipulate the markets. A win for the U.S. and Israel. But of course, it isn't that they're so wise. They just had this whole game played on them with the negotiations, both last June and then recently in February. You know, the negotiations are going on. They're doing good faith negotiations. They made some major concessions, so much so that the guy from Oman that was moderating this, as he learned that they're about to go to war, went very quickly to the U.S. to say, hey, look, we've had a lot of movement on this, but nothing is going to stop them when they have made up their mind as to what they want to do. You know, it's kind of interesting. Over the weekend had Robert Mueller died, and I think Trump wrote his own eulogy, which I guess is really not going to be truly a eulogy. That'd be saying something good about somebody, but I think it will be the thing that everybody says about Donald Trump. What he said about Robert Mueller was, I'm glad he's dead. He can't hurt innocent people anymore. I think that will be the eulogy for Donald Trump. That will be what everybody says when that horrible person is gone. And we are waiting to see that happen. We'll be right back.
You're listening to The David Knight Show.
APS Radio delivers multiple channels of music right to your mobile device. Get the APS Radio app today and listen wherever you go.
Well, welcome back. And we've got some comments here. Milton Milankovic, thank you very much for the tip. He says, thank you, David. I was wondering how we can help support the show. Would reposting be a good idea or a subscriber drive? Well, reposting is always a good idea. And if you are, wherever you're listening to the show, if you could like the show, that helps a great deal as well. It's pretty hard for people to find us. We're shadow banned on most of the podcast formats. is a bit difficult to find. If you're having trouble finding the show, you can always go to davidknight.news, and there you'll find links to where the show can be found, as well as links to where you can help us financially, support the show financially. It's also a good idea if you're on Twitter or whatever. I know that I'm not only shadow banned, I mean, they've not only just throttled me back, they've cut off the engine, basically. I even asked Grok, I said, how do I know if I'm shadow banned? They said, well, this, yeah, you are shadow banned. And so, when their own platform tells you that you're shadow banned, you pretty much know it. But I can see it, not just in terms of no engagement, but you can even have there, how many people have seen this post? And you can pretty much tell that they are hiding the post. Nobody is seeing it. So if you want to help us on any platform, that is a big advantage. I don't know about Rumble. It's like I've had a lot to say about Dan Bongino, and we look at what is going on with the FBI and how they have covered up one investigation after the other. But the biggest one, of course, being the Epstein documents. There's absolutely no excuse for what's been going on with the FBI since its creation with J. Edgar Hoover. And Kash Patel and Dan Bongino will go down as people who have propagated that legacy of feds blocking investigations, that FBI. That's what they do all the time. You go back and look at the Zorro Ranch and all the rest of the stuff. Whether you're talking about Flight 800 or anything else, you always have these people from the FBI coming in and confiscating evidence, telling people at the state or local level, we don't want you investigating this anymore. We'll investigate it. Then you find out later on with the Zorro Ranch that the FBI didn't do any investigation. They just came in and told them, we'll take the evidence. We don't want you conducting the investigation. We'll do it. And then they don't do it. They shut down and block investigations over and over. It's highly political. So one of the reasons why it's not in the Constitution to have anything like that. The founders were wise enough to know that if you're going to create some kind of a federal police force or federal investigation force, it's going to be easily and quickly corrupted, and it'll serve the politicians. Stealth Patriot, thank you very much. He says, has anyone mentioned how that 5-day ceasefire negotiation lie could be stalling tactics for the U.S. to get radar and missile systems out of South Korea to the Persian Gulf? Yeah, exactly. They're trying to buy time for all this stuff. And when you look at it, the bottom line is it's still going to be very easy for Iran to set the Middle East on fire. All of these different facilities are so incredibly vulnerable. And of course, we showed you that Port Arthur had a big fire there. I don't know if that was, people said they heard an explosion. It doesn't have to have been a bomb that caused that explosion. It could have been something that is normal. But the bottom line, we've talked about this for the longest time. I've talked to Jack Lawson about it for the longest time. I've talked to Goat Tree about it. All these different facilities, our entire infrastructure is very, very vulnerable. Everybody's is. And we've seen this for the longest time in Ukraine and Russia. Both of them have been attacking each other's infrastructure. It's always very, very vulnerable. And we're vulnerable to that as well here. It'd be very easy for Iran and the cartels to join forces. And if they don't do it, it'd be very easy for the U.S. or Israel to do a false flag attack and blame it on the cartels or on Iran as well. Empty Grave says the Texas oil refinery attack was a gaggle of Iranians. They were shouting Allah Akbar, while I guess Allahu Akbar, right? It's not God is great, but his God is greater is really what they're saying. While attacking it with box cutters. And they dropped their passports. So we know that for sure. Yeah, everything is burned down except for their passports, just like 9/11. Oh, thank you. That was good humor. So we had, Joe Kent, who thankfully put everything in his life on the line, just like John Kiriakou did. And they're going to come after him really hard. But he is going everywhere. He will go on even with Mark Levin. He goes on with this AIPAC lobbyist who is a foreign agent that hasn't registered. That's Mark Levin. And so as he points out on his post, Joe Kent said, step one in de-escalation must be restraining the Israelis. Otherwise, all efforts to negotiate will follow this same pattern. of the president publicly announcing de-escalation and then Israel taking major strikes to destroy the negotiations and in turn weaken our ability to negotiate. He did that in response to Trump making his announcement, and then immediately Israel comes in and strikes. But of course, somebody in the Trump administration struck gold on the stock markets and the oil markets by betting on whether they were going to go up or down. And so he goes on with Mark Levin, and the two of them went back and forth a bit. Let's see, where did that get put? Was that on the second page here? Do you know where the Mark Levin clip is? I want to play that. Here we are.
And also, as Secretary Rubio said, there was no imminent threat coming from Iran against the Americans.
Well, you know, he corrected that.
There was an imminent threat coming from the Israelis who were going to attack. But that's actually the truth.
Okay, hold on. We're going to do it. We're going to do it honestly, one point at a time.
Had observed, the Iranians had observed an escalation ladder. They hadn't attacked us under President Trump.
Can you do me a favor? And I don't mean to be rude. Can you talk a little more slowly? I'm having trouble hearing. Take your time. Go ahead.
I'm having trouble figuring out what I'm going to say in response.
When President Trump came into office, the Iranians knew that President Trump wanted to get a deal. They observed the escalatory ladder very carefully. They stopped having our proxies attack us like they were attacking us under the Biden administration. And they got to the negotiating table with us about the nuclear agenda. When the 12-day war kicked off and the Israelis started that, the Iranians still didn't attack us.
All right. We have to take a break. I'm going to circle back on some of your comments here, and then I have some other questions. I appreciate you being here. We'll be right back with Joe Kent.
That's right. When you can't, we don't have a comment. I'm sorry. Could you repeat that again? I didn't. So, and if all else fails, you go to a commercial break, right? Well, when all else fails, you go on the attack personally, and that's what Lindsey Graham is doing. So he says that Kent is a lying anti-Semite. I just don't have the sufficient words to express my contempt for Lindsey Graham. I guess I'll have to go to a commercial break here. I just can't think of anything polite that I could say that isn't a bunch of four-letter words about Lindsey Graham. But it's just absolutely, you're going to play the race card against him, are you? And you're going to say he's lying? Well, we know that you're lying, and we know that you are a lying murderer who can't get enough blood of Americans on his hands to satisfy himself. What a despicable vampire he is. And then, of course, we have Donald Trump himself always going on the personal attack, right? And what does he do? He goes after Joe Kent's wife. Are you kidding me? What an idiot Donald Trump is. As a matter of fact, Joe Kent's wife was in the military. She was killed by an ISIS bomb. And he's going to attack her wife and attack Joe Kent for getting married later? I guess Joe Kent didn't do it the way that Donald Trump always does it. Donald Trump always tries on new wives while he's still married. And then he dumps the other ones. Listen to what he said.
Mr. President, do you know whether Joe Kent was leaking?
Look, I'm not a fan of the guy. If you look at, and you
not a fan.
This, if you look at his truths or whatever he went on, if it's X or truth, if you look at his truths or his statements, he was all for everything. All of a sudden, he wasn't. He was a man that I met at Dover. He came and his wife was killed. He remarried fairly quickly. His wife was killed, and I felt badly for him. He ran for Congress, he lost. He ran for Congress again, and he lost. I said, you know, he's a guy, nice guy, seemed like a very nice guy. I met him. He was pretty heartbroken, But I said, you know, it's a shame. He ran for Congress twice. Call him up, give him a job in the White House. Smart. They gave him a job in the White House, and this is what he does to me, you know? Being a nice guy doesn't pay off too much. Think of it.
Narcissist.
He loses twice in Congress, ran not very good campaigns, should have won, but he loses twice. How do I get him? I have my people call him, because I didn't deal with him for the most part. I saw him a couple of times, but I never dealt with him at all. I had no idea his ideology was left or right, whatever it is. I can say this. He said
his ideology was what you ran on.
Iran is not a threat. Iran's been a threat for 47 years, and there's
47
not a country
years
in the
now,
world
right.
that doesn't agree with me on that. So I take this.
I don't
guy,
agree with you on
Joe
that.
Kent, who lost
We've been a
twice
threat to Iran for 73.
badly and tough, and was devastated. And I know that he lost his wife. So instead of letting him live out his life, I brilliantly have my people call him and offer him a job in.
He's such a nice guy, isn't he?
In the White House. And what does he do? He goes out and he says that Iran is not a threat to get publicity. Now, he probably signed up with CNN, or maybe he signed up with your division of Newsmax. I don't know, but probably signed up with CNN or somebody. But
He's just making
if you
this stuff
look
up.
at his tweets, X's, or truths, whatever he uses. I don't know, because I don't follow him. What he said is 100% he agrees with me. All of a sudden he leaves. I never knew he had a problem. Now, I hear they're looking at him for leaking. That's possible. But just so you understand, just to put it to rest, he lost twice badly. He also lost his wife.
Third time he's mentioned this.
He lost his wife. I felt badly for him. So I told my people, reach out to him, give him a job at the White House.
Yeah, right.
This is the thanks I get. Any other?
He's so charitable, isn't he? Yeah. No, he's upset because he knows that it has exposed his hypocrisy of what he ran on. You know, Tulsi Gabbard and Joe Kent and so many people were saying, yeah, we're not going to do these regime change wars in the Middle East. And yet Trump is saying it himself. And so that's the way this all rolls out. It rolls out with an ad hominem attack, take the attack to the man, and then you come up with some baseless lawfare, you know, like he has done so many times against people who are his political opponents. And now Joe Kent is his political opponent. As one person said about his comments about, well, he married maybe a little bit too soon, you know. Said that same thing about Thomas Massey. But as many people pointed out, at least these guys didn't cheat on their wives like you did. As one person said, nobody is taking marriage or morality advice from this piece of excrement. He's been married 3 times and he cheated on every one of them. And he was best friends with a child sex trafficker for 25 years. So we're supposed to care what Donald Trump says about that. And so they're going to go after him for leaking. And he had, as part of this interview with Mark Levin wants to try to portray him as a lobbyist when we all know who the real lobbyist is. The real lobbyist is Mark Levin. And they're coming after him because he criticizes Israel. And as we've been told time and again, that if you criticize a foreign government, that makes you racist. Well, that's not true, even if the foreign government is racist. Even if it is an ethnic fascist state, criticizing that ethnic fascist state does not make you a racist for pointing out what they are. Joe Kent makes a genuine plea to Trump. He says, address the Israeli issue. And he says, I think he's got to address this first, as I pointed out. I read that tweet. He said, you got to tell them to stop. And he said they might back off for a week or so, but they're really not going to listen to you. And so in this interview that he had with Tucker Carlson that went on for over an hour, he outlined what he saw as the only viable leverage withdrawing U.S. defensive support unless Israel shifts fully to a defensive posture. He says, you got to take away their ability to do that, and we're not going to support you while you are on the offense. Tying American support to Israeli operational restraint would take a massive structural change in the U.S.-Israeli relationship if it was actually carried out in practice, because it's never been done by either political party. Both of them are owned by Israel. Kent argued that the U.S. and Israeli endgames in Iran are no longer aligned. While Washington may seek limited military objectives, he described Israel's aims as far more expansive, far more destabilizing. He said the Israelis want full regime change. No, actually, that's not even it. They want to destroy the entire Middle East. They want to do to the entire Middle East, all the Gulf states, what they did to Gaza, because they want to take it over. That's one of the reasons I believe that Trump has got these crooked real estate guys, Witkoff and criminal son-in-law Jared Kushner, why he's got them as a special envoys. They are his real estate agents. They have a very high tolerance for chaos, said Kent of the Israelis. And when he was on with Tucker Carlson, again, the pointed criticism of both Trump as well as Israel has got the knives out for him. During a 2-hour conversation with Carlson, Kent essentially said the reason that Trump reversed his stance on regime change wars comes down to one factor: foreign influence, particularly that of Israel, America's quote-unquote best ally in the Middle East, as far as Kent is concerned, intentionally dragged the U.S. into war. He says, was Iran on the verge of getting a nuclear weapon? That was asked by Tucker. Kent said no. Iran was not close to building a nuclear weapon before the current war started, nor last summer before the U.S. hit 3 Iranian nuclear sites. He said the Iranians have a religious ruling, a fatwa, against actually developing a nuclear weapon since 2004. That's been in place since 2004, and it's available in the public sphere. But then also we had no intelligence to indicate that that favor was being disobeyed or that it was on the cusp of being lifted. I'm sorry, not favor, but fatwa. When asked if he knew of anyone in the U.S. government who claimed the existence of intelligence that said that Iran posed an imminent threat or was on the cusp of building a nuclear weapon, Kent said no. However, he added that that doesn't mean that Israel did not provide intelligence saying exactly that. He said, I know the Israeli officials, some in intelligence, some in government, will come to the U.S. government officials and they will say all kinds of things that we know from our intelligence just simply isn't true. You know, people, for example, like Benjamin Netanyahu, who's been lying in public about this, and you can imagine the tall tales that he told Donald Trump in his 7 visits in the last year, when he's been saying the kinds of nonsense that he's said in public for decades. People laughed at him back in the 90s when he was talking about Israel just being a couple of weeks or months away from having a nuclear weapon back in the 90s. And he had behind him one of the classic Looney Tune bombs, you know, that looks like a bowling ball with a cylinder stuck in the top and a burning fuse on the top. That was behind him as he was telling everybody just how imminent it was. And everybody was, yeah, where's the kaboom? Everybody was laughing about him. It was, but he wasn't shamed. He was a shameless liar and has been for decades, always coming up with the same story. He's as bad as any of these climate alarmists, the nuclear alarmists. When you know no one will call you out on your lie, it's easy to be shameless, says Travis. Yeah, he's absolutely right. Of course, we had a little bit of delay in the show today because we had some new equipment failures, and the guys quickly hobbled together some replacements, so he can't chime in and speak today. He can only type in the background there. And even that is a little bit difficult for us to do because my screen is all messed up from what it typically is. He says, I'm convinced that BB is alive and sabotaging us. Well, he's alive in spirit one way or the other because even if he were killed, the agenda that he represents is still well represented there. They do need to have somebody with his personal charisma and leadership ability to continue to deceive people. According to Kent, neoconservatives and other elements of the pro-Israel lobby had moved the bar on what was acceptable for Iran to have. The intention being to spoil negotiations between America and Iran and to trigger a conflict. The lobby turned the new red line from some acceptable enrichment to no enrichment, no uranium whatsoever. Enrichment became the narrative, he said, not a nuclear weapon. So that hung up and that short-circuited and that really sabotaged the entire negotiations. The Israelis came in and they moved that red line. And they would do a lot to say, oh, and they're enriching. I got to say, just as we said about regime change in Iran, if you wanted regime change, the best thing you could have done is to stay out of it and let the people change things internally. They didn't like the Ayatollah's regime that was there, and they could have changed it. They're not going to change it now. That is absolutely not going to happen. You have snatched defeat out of the jaws of victory, if regime change was your issue. If the other issue was nuclear weapons, these are the two things that they keep telling us, regime change and nuclear weapons. Well, you blew the regime change. Now, when it comes to nuclear weapons, here's the lesson for Iran. If they don't have nuclear weapons, then they are vulnerable to being attacked constantly at the whim of Israel and the United States as well. So they need to have nuclear weapons. Now, they're going to do everything to acquire nuclear weapons. So you can forget the fatwa that was there. That's gone away. As a matter of fact, that went away when you wiped out the leadership as well. So if your two objectives are regime change and stopping nuclear weapons, you have just guaranteed that neither of those are going to happen. That's the brilliance of American foreign policy and this kind of aggression that we're involved in. And so he goes on to say, after that, the propaganda ecosystem jumped in to provide support for the new narrative, he said. Broadcasters like Mark Levin and Sean Hannity, he said they would say basically the same thing. Or the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, they would jump in with support for the new talking points. And so Tucker Carlson said, so Israeli government talking points laundered through Fox News and the Wall Street Journal? Say it ain't so, Joe. This is not even shoeless Joe. And he certainly isn't clueless. He knows exactly right. He says, yes. He said Israeli officials, including Netanyahu, would also follow up and hammer in those same talking points. So they run the talking points through major media, left and right. They run the talking points through people like Sean Hannity and Mark Levin. And so then let's go to the clip here where Joe Kent is on with Mark Levin, and they start talking about lobbying.
President Trump said no nuclear weapons. And then through official engagements through the Israelis and then also the media echo chamber that wanted regime change in Iran said, no, we need to say that the Iranians can't.
What about the media echo chamber, your buddies who didn't want regime change in Iran?
You're the media echo chamber.
Chambers out there, wouldn't you say?
It appears that your media echo chamber was much more successful.
No, it wasn't. I never lobbied the president. Hey, pay attention to me. I never lobbied the president.
Pay attention to me.
You guys keep putting that crap out there.
Arrogant.
I met with the president once at his request, and I said to the president, ready for this, Joe? I said, they're saying out there that I'm lobbying you. You know what he did? He laughed. You know what he said? Mark, I know where you stand. I watch your show on Saturday and Sunday. Anything I say here, pay attention. Anything I say here is what I would say. I did what?
You can lobby him by using the power of your show, the power of your
Come on, brother. You're not. You
can lobby the American people.
Now, let's go on. I have a question.
Yeah, what he should have asked him, he should have said, have you registered as a foreign agent of Israel, Mark Levin? Because you are a foreign agent of Israel. That's really what Joe Kent should have said. I would love to say that to Mark Levin. I despise that guy. You know, he and Ben Shapiro, just amazing to me. What traitors they are. The Jonathan Pollard axis of news media. So he suggested that Washington could have reacted differently. That is Joe Kent. He said we could have told Israel not to attack. We could have warned them that if they chose to do it anyway, we would take something away. We provide defense services for Israel, so he said we get to dictate the terms of when they go on the offensive. Otherwise, they stand to lose that relationship. You know, we do that all the time. We would send these very dangerous long-range weapons into Ukraine and say, you can't use those yet, right? Put restrictions on it. Many times they would give weapon systems to countries and they would put restrictions on them. You can do that unless you are owned by the other people, unless you're not allowed to even say certain things in public because of that foreign government that owns you. Israel got us into this war. Its lobby in the United States pressured the president, and its prime minister in Israel told the president, we're going in without you. Join us, because if you don't, your troops in that region, your interests in that region, your citizens in that region will all be at risk. You have no choice. Now, where did Joe Kent get this? It's basically what Marco Rubio said in public as he was explaining how we got into this whole thing. Anyway, he said the reason I'm sorry, this is not him, but this is the New American saying he concluded that the reason that Kent is incurring so many attacks is because he's telling the truth. Among the attacks that Carlson waved off is the allegation that Kent was leaking classified information to the media. The FBI is indeed investigating Kent for allegedly leaking classified information. Let me say something. And this corrupt, politicized administration, allegations and investigations are absolutely meaningless. Absolutely meaningless. As a matter of fact, they might be seen as a negative indicator of your innocence. And I talked about this from the very beginning. I said, look at who is accusing him. It's the person who was Trump's deputy chief of staff in his first administration. So why weren't these charges investigated in the first administration? And if he was a leaker, why would they put him in as the deputy director of national intelligence if he was a leaker? None of this holds up to scrutiny. It's all inconsistent. It is so typical of Trump and every one of the, let's just say people, be polite. Every one of the people that he hires. It's like Robert E. Lee would look at the Yankees who were attacking, and he would just refer to them as those people, right? Let's just say that about the Trump administration. Those people. Let's try to use the kind of restraint that we should here. But anyway, it doesn't make any sense. So, but it is exactly the type of thing that we have come to see. By the way, Joe Kent is the one who said that the FBI blocked an investigation into a possible foreign role in the Charlie Kirk assassination. He said they shut that down. I mean, is that beyond the pale? Is that something that we would be surprised about the FBI shutting down an investigation? When they shut down the investigation into Jeffrey Epstein's Zorro Ranch, when they shut down the investigation of Flight 800, I could go on and on and on. Why would we be surprised at anything that the corrupt FBI has done? He said they basically cut off all of our access to be able to get any information about what was going on. And so that is not a surprise, not at all. It is completely consistent with the FBI's actions always. We'll take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
Making sense common again. You're listening to The David Knight Show.
Whether you're feeling like the blues or bluegrass, APS Radio has you covered. Check out a wide variety of channels on our app at apsradio.com.
Well, before I run out of time, I got a lot of things that I want to cover here real quickly. I mean, we got some major developments with artificial intelligence. We have some developments, of course, with ICE at the airports. And I want to get to all that before. And also want to talk about what's going on with gold. We're going to try to hit all those before we run out of time in this last half hour or so. But I got a couple of comments. Jim Z7, thank you very much for the tip. He said, Iranians probably did Nord Stream pipeline as well. They blamed it on everybody except the Iranians. But of course, when you look at one of these things, you do exactly, if you're trying to investigate this or trying to figure out what's going on, you do the same thing that a police investigator would do. You look at who has opportunity and ability, who has motive, who benefits from this. Every one of those pointed to the U.S. government, always did. And of course, we had, who was the guy? Seymour Hersh, who's got some pretty good sources, and he got very granular in terms of the details and the allegations, even talking about the specific groups and bases where the people came from, where they did that. But yeah, that was obviously an American sabotage. We understand the reasons for it clearly. DG8, thank you for the tip. He says, David, I can assure you that MAGA would be furious if Lala Harris went to war with Iran and gas hit $4 a gallon and diesel hit $6 a gallon. But not a word from them now. They are cheerleading the destruction of the American dream. That's exactly what is happening. It truly is amazing when you look at the parallels between what happened 5 years ago and what is happening now. Both of those from Trump, and both of those accompanied by absolutely cultish cheerleading. It absolutely is insane. Well, let's take a look at what's going on with ICE. Trump scolded Newsmax reporter for asking a question about ICE. He basically says, who are you with? Newsmax. Oh, you're not doing a very good job. You hear me? Newsmax should fire you, basically, is what he's saying. So he was very upset about it. But of course, when we look at it, I think we ought to be very upset about ICE being at the airports. I think we ought to be upset about ICE, the way they conduct themselves, period. This is what just recently happened. This is what happens when you put the ICE thugs in the airport. I never saw TSA doing this.
Leave her alone! What are you doing? Leave her alone!
They got a grandmother on the ground.
I hope you're so proud of yourselves. You're on video now, too. Yeah. Shame
ICE
on
thugs.
you un-American pieces of you.
Yeah, well, that is kind of what these people are all about. That's one of the reasons why it just amazed me to see Mark Wayne Mullen. Rand Paul did such an excellent job of laying out what a bullying thug he is, always wanting to brawl with people. That is the last thing that you need at ICE, unless your purpose was to have ICE be a bunch of thugs in the first place. As a matter of fact, this is a warning here on this thing. This is a collection.
Help me during the struggle.
This is what ICE does.
Drag this pregnant woman across the street.
Are we really going to be the Gestapo? Where's your papers? Is that what we've come to?
Yep.
I know right here.
To all ICE officers, you have federal immunity in the conduct of your duties.
I'm literally a U.S. citizen.
Yeah, Stephen Miller wants it.
I'm not mad, boy. No!
The precedent here is very simple.
What did you do? You are a criminal!
That guy's protected by absolute immunity.
We will find you. You will never return.
She needs to go to jail.
This community.
To ICE, get the out of Minneapolis.
Yeah, that's a good clip there. Sums it up. And of course, you see people from Stephen Miller to J.D. Vance, they've got absolute immunity. You can do anything that you want. There's no constraints on you. Talk about that. I mean, what do you think is going to come from that when you've got people who are given badges and total immunity, and you push that on them? Do whatever you want. Come on, intimidate people. Gestapo. That's what we're talking about. And look, Stephen Miller is going to have a lot more say-so in the White House. Susie Wiles, who might have been a moderating influence, who seemed to have moderating influence on this gang that is there now. She has cancer, and she's not going to be having as much influence there. And I don't know if she's taking a leave of absence or what's going to happen. Of course, she's going to be going for treatment and that type of thing. Stephen Miller is going to be ascending in terms of the influence there. A very, very dangerous influence indeed is what he's going to be there. But when you look at ICE, and now you're going to give somebody like Markwayne Mullin, who has over and over again tried to start fights with people in Congress, physical fights with people. Just amazing. It's exactly what Trump wants. And so Trump berated the Newsmax reporter who questioned him about his deployment of ICE agents in American airports, repeatedly telling the reporter that he wasn't doing a good job and joking to the cameras like a schoolyard bully among cronies because everybody else is afraid to say it. Of course, you listen to the question that he had, that wasn't anything that was out of line. And they're pointing out that one reporter in the press pool began by asking the president a fairly neutrally worded question about the announcement that ICE agents would be deployed to major airports as TSA experiences staffing gaps due to a partial government shutdown. He says, he quickly snapped at him and said, "Who are you with?" And when he said Newsmax, he said, "Well, let's go to CNN." CNN basically asked the same question. He goes, "How about that? I'm including CNN and not Newsmax. I mean, they should fire you," type of thing, right? So, as they point out here in The Independent out of the UK, it wasn't clear what Trump's issue was with the question. He only heard a couple of words. He answered other questions about ICE deployment in the same gaggle moments later when questioned by other outlets, including CNN. And he says, "I'm taking CNN over Newsmax." Can you believe it? His beefs with reporters on Air Force One, of course, have been pretty regular. In many cases, he insults them personally. You know, you look really angry. You look awful. Or just tells them, "That's enough, piggy," right? What a thug. What a bully he is. As a matter of fact, he says, "I requested for now, I'm a big believer that they should be able to wear masks when they go knock down, murderers and criminals and others. But for the purposes of the airport, I requested that they take off the masks. I don't like it for the airport. I believe they are willing to do that. The people coming into the airport, typically speaking, are not murderers, killers, drug dealers, etc. They don't take planes, right?" Well, if we got such a great crowd of people, clientele coming into the airports, maybe we could just dispense of TSA altogether. As a matter of fact, they're out there saying that they're coming after the worst of the worst, and yet 73% of the people that they get violent with, that they kidnap and so forth, 73% of the people have no criminal record whatsoever, other than the fact that they came here illegally. Treat that as a misdemeanor. And this is one of the reasons why I had that listener, so I've listened to you for many years, but he was furious that I would have that video from Sheriff was it Judd Grady or Grady Judd. I can never remember which name is first and which one's last. Anyway, he says he's just a soundbite machine. Well, the soundbite that he had fit perfectly with ICE, where he said, "Hey, just chill out. Have a moon pie. Stop murdering people." I mean, isn't that the soundbite that you want for ICE and for Markwayne Mullin? And so, yeah, I pointed out that he was a drug warrior. I disagree with him on a lot of different issues. But that is the soundbite that really does apply to ICE. Just chill out. Have a moon pie. Stop murdering people. But, of course, the king doesn't like to have any... he doesn't like it to look at these airports here. The king has spoken, so now they don't have masks. And we can see who the people were that were beating up on that elderly lady there. What a bunch of thugs. I'm disgusted with him. But he did like the masks in 2020. As a matter of fact, he had his own mask that has his presidential seal on the cheek. I used to open my program with that and the Imperial March from Star Wars. Dun, dun, dun. He and his bunch of thugs with their black masks on, walking around as if that was something that was going to help people. No, folks, we live in a police state. There's absolutely no question about it. GOP senators are going to meet with Trump on Monday night to discuss DHS funding. And as this person pointed out, said, "Know this, you are living in a police state." Yes, authoritarian regimes and police states frequently deploy military, paramilitary, or specialized security troops to airports to monitor, interrogate, and detain citizens or foreign nationals, particularly to control movement and to stifle dissent. Based on recent global security developments, here is how military-style presence is utilized for detention. Detention and screening in states with high security controls. Troops or paramilitary units are stationed at checkpoints to conduct intensive screening. You know, that's where you would see the Nazis. Your identity papers, right? Be at the train depots and places like that. That's exactly what we're looking at. Here's one of the things I really was not able to get an answer to. I still don't understand this. How, if the Democrats have stopped funding to DHS because they don't like the thuggish behavior of ICE, if they've stopped the funding to them, how is it that ICE has the people to go to the airports, but TSA is not getting any funding? You might ask yourself that question. Is it because the Gestapo is the number one priority of this president? I don't really understand what's going on with that, frankly. But let's take a quick look at what's going on before we run out of time with AI. We've got two things that have happened with AI that are both very troubling developments. One of them coming from the White House. The other one is coming from Marsha Blackburn. I mentioned this yesterday in the introduction to the show, but I didn't get to it. We had so many different issues yesterday. It was kind of crazy. But Marsha Blackburn is a senator from Tennessee. She is stepping down from her position as a senator, and she is running for governor. And there is nobody that comes close to her chances of winning. All the Republicans have basically essentially dropped out or withdrawn. Everybody is yielding to Marsha Blackburn, who has a lot of popularity and a lot of visibility and a lot of money behind her. She has introduced a bill about artificial intelligence, which is the antithesis, folks, of the 10th Amendment. It is the antithesis of what is needed. It attacks our privacy. It attacks the internet and our liberties. It is an abomination. And the White House, at the same time, has come out with its own version of that does many of the same things. And so I wanted to talk about that. She calls her bill the Trump America AI Act. Maybe that would be a clue. If this is the Trump America, this is not the America that you and I know and love. This is the Trump America. It repeals Section 230. It expands liability, and it establishes centralized federal control over AI systems. And not only that, but over the internet as well. So Marsha Blackburn, Senator Marsha Blackburn, soon to be governor of Tennessee. This is a very concerning thing. Could be living in the state with this totalitarian wannabe, this person who wants to consolidate all power into Washington. What are the chances that state government is going to nullify any Washington overreach when you got a governor like Marsha Blackburn? She has released a 291-page legislative framework that would repeal Section 230, expand liability across the artificial intelligence ecosystem, and establish a unified federal rule book governing how AI systems are built, deployed, and controlled in the United States. So let's take these things one at a time. First of all, Section 230. What is Section 230? Well, you know, going back to the censorship wars that really began back in 2018, you had people like Jack Dorsey, who owned Twitter at the time, saying, "We are the digital public square." And that was what Section 230 was about. Section 230 said that the platforms where people would post stuff up, whether you're talking about your social media posts or you're talking about an article that you might put up on Substack or something like that, that the people running Twitter or the people running Substack would not have any connection to the content that was there. So if there was something that was libelous or you could have legal action against, if it was criminal or libelous or whatever, they would not come after they're not come after Substack. They would not come after Twitter or X or Facebook or whatever. That was what Section 230 was about, saying they were merely there as a public square utility, right? And that's like saying that, you know, if somebody used some electricity to, commit a crime. Let's say they charge their electric vehicle that they're going to use as a getaway car. Not a good idea considering range anxiety. If you're going to rob a bank, you would not want to do that with an EV, I think. But let's say that you were doing that. That would be then going after the power company that sold you the electricity to charge your electric vehicle getaway car. What a ridiculous example this is. Anyway, but the utility, the electricity company is just a utility company, right? And so they're just providing a service. They're not to be connected to anything that's there. They would never use the phone company or the utility company as charge them with conspiracy to commit a crime simply because people used the telephone to talk to other people about the crime that they were going to commit. Section 230, being taken that away, changes the nature of the internet completely. Now, my complaint with Section 230 was that because of Section 230, the people like Twitter and others should not be punishing people. And we knew that they were. We knew that they were the ones who were doing the censorship. And they tried to pretend that we knew it was originally coming from the government, that the government was the real hand behind all this stuff. And these people were doing it because they were intimidated by the government. But they were saying, we do it because we don't like your viewpoint and we're going to censor you. And so they took it on themselves and said, well, in that case, then they need to lose this 230 protection, if that's really true. And I knew it wasn't true, but I said, let's just continue with their alibi here. If that were true, they should lose their 230 protection because now they're deciding which views they're going to let out and which ones they're not going to let out. So they're exercising editorial content. And so they are now endorsing or suppressing certain views there, and they're now a publisher rather than a public square. And so she wants to get rid of that. And then what she wants to do is to expand liability to everybody. And we're seeing this happening over and over again. We were talking about this last week. Lance brought this to my attention, how they're doing this with operating systems now. They were doing it with 3D printers. And now, taking the liability to the 3D printer manufacturers and saying, you're going to look at everything that everybody is printing and make sure that it doesn't violate any of our laws in terms of printing a 3D gun. You're going to have to make sure that it doesn't violate anybody's copyright issues. And if you don't do that, if you don't police that, then we will come after you, the 3D printer manufacturer. They're doing the same thing with this age verification stuff. And that's a part of what Marsha Blackburn is doing as well. Marsha. The Brady Bunch here. But they are they're going to tell these operating systems and other applications that they're going to have to take the responsibility to determine somehow the age of the people that are using their product. And if they don't do that, they're going to have massive fines that will put them out of business. Now, that's going to put out of business any individual or any small companies or any open source companies that are trying to put together something. So you'll only have Apple and Microsoft and a couple others like that will toe the line, that are making so much money that they can go through and do the rest of the stuff. That's going to be the effect. The effect will be that it will centralize control. It will do it through a fascist mechanism of using the corporations as the enforcers under threat of fines and lawsuits. And then finally, this unified federal rule book that Marsha Blackburn wants. And she even uses the tired phrase, you immediately know where these people are coming from when they start talking about a patchwork of regulations throughout the various states. That's constitutional. That was desired by the wise founders of this country, the people who put together the Constitution. They wanted to have a patchwork of regulations. They wanted to have different, the states, first of all, were recognized as sovereign. They were recognized as the creators of the federal government and sovereign over it, just like the people were supposed to be sovereign over the federal government. The creature has now become the monster, this Frankenstein monster that they created, lording over the states and the people in violation of the 10th Amendment. No, we wanted to have a laboratory of 50 different, if you want to look at it from a regulation standpoint, you would want to have a laboratory of 50 different approaches to these different things to see what works and what doesn't work. But no, they want to centralize everything. And that was the big issue from the founders. They called it consolidation. And that is really what it is, consolidation of government, centralization of all of this stuff. The proposal coming from Marsha Blackburn, the Trump America AI Act, just the title of that thing, it's being presented as a pro-innovation, pro-safety measure to protect children, creators, conservatives, and communities while ensuring the U.S. dominance in the global AI race. The AI is going to be used to ensure their global dominance over people, not over competitors. The actual structure of the bill reveals a comprehensive system that centralizes regulatory authority, expands legal exposure for platforms, and creates new mechanisms for controlling AI outputs and digital information flows. Platforms would no longer be shielded from liability tied to user-generated content, meaning that they must evaluate whether hosting certain reporting could expose them to lawsuits. So again, they want to make them into ultra-conservative police. They're going to police the content that you're going to put there. I've talked for the longest time about the Microsoft Coalition for Content Provenance and Authentication. I said, isn't it a coincidence that the initials are CCPA, just like Chinese Communist Party of America, because that's really what it is. It's a kind of social credit censorship of people, identifying people who are enemies of the state, enemies at least of the state agenda, whatever that agenda is, and that's constantly changing. And I go back and look at this, and I have been the enemy of pretty much every one of their agendas, whether you're talking about climate change or the COVID nonsense that was out there, or their wars, or their just down the list. You name it. When you ever look at any of these agendas, I always am on the other side of it. And so I paid a lot of attention to the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authentication. And what that was about was saying we had a coalition of hardware, software, operating systems, as well as determining what is allowed in terms of what is good content and what is bad content. They brought in government agencies and some of the mainstream media. So they're going to look at who is creating this. That is the provenance. And they're going to authenticate you. And they're going to stop you from being able to create anything, whether you're talking about a picture, an image, a video, text, a meme, you name it. They would identify you as a person that they don't like creating stuff like this. And they would stop the content from even being uploaded. That was the intent of this. That's essentially what Marsha Blackburn is doing. She's going to make the corporations so cautious about this because of the financial possible consequences that they will preemptively stop it. So she has accomplished this for them. At the center of the bill is the full repeal of Section 230, long considered to be the legal foundation of the modern internet, to provide platforms like Substack from not being treated as the publisher of user-generated content. The Blackburn framework would eliminate the protection by repealing Section 230 entirely. I've got to announce, I don't care who Marsha Blackburn is running against in Tennessee. I will vote against her. That's Republican and Democrat. She could be running against Karl Marx or Fidel Castro, and I would vote for them over Marsha Blackburn. She is more dangerous because people don't understand where she's coming from. You see somebody like Fidel Castro or Karl Marx, oh, I know who these guys are, and you're watching them, right? Just like Lala Harris, right? But you get somebody like Donald Trump or Marsha Blackburn, and everybody trusts them. That's why they're more dangerous. And I've said this about Trump for the last 6 years. I said, if you got somebody who is the old thing about the fifth column, right? And that goes back to the Spanish Revolution, the Spanish revolt that was happening with the communists and the fascists, early 20th century. And they said, well, we've got 4 divisions out there, but the most important one we've got is the fifth column that we've got. And that's here internally. Those are the people who are going to support us internally when these people from the outside attack. It's more dangerous to have an espionage agent or an infiltrator who is a traitor who will stab you in the back that you think is on your side than it is to have these four other columns out there who are wearing uniforms and flying a flag, and you know they're your opponent. The most dangerous person is somebody like Donald Trump or Marsha Blackburn. Platforms said AI developers could face legal action for defective design, failure to warn, or producing systems deemed to be unreasonably dangerous. They must actively manage and restrict content, or they risk being sued. That's the bottom line, folks. It's going to be proactive censorship. And what they're doing is the same kind of mechanism that you've seen done by banks, that type of know your customer rules and stuff like that, turning the corporation into the enforcer and the police organization. And that is what her rule is doing. And, of course, the Trump administration has got their own way of doing this as well. Part of her regulation would be to watermark and to content provenance standards that she has as part of this. So, again, she's doing the whole CCPA thing that was coming from Microsoft. Marsha Microsoft. There you go. Content provenance tracking. Who created this digital content? Watermarking of all AI-generated media. Detection of synthetic or modified content. Well, you know, we have the ability to do that right now. Just take a look at these Netanyahu videos that were out there. Requires AI providers to allow content owners to attach provenance data, and it prohibits its removal. And I said this for the longest time. It's like, well, then why do we need to have these other regulations out there? You know, they use the fact that AI could do deep fakes and stuff. And so now we're going to have your identity out there. And I said, well, why not just require that, the AI has a watermark or something on it, or has something that is some metadata that cannot be removed that is there. You don't have to know the provenance. You don't have to know who it is that created that. You just have to know that it was done by AI. But they take it to the next step, because that's what this is really about. New copyright and likeness liability for AI. And I got to say that that is the thing that has been weaponized against us more than anything. Again, going back to the first time InfoWars was censored, 5 years before the big censorship in 2018. In 2013, on the 100th anniversary of the Federal Reserve, I did It's a Wonderful Lie. That was covered under fair use. There's a couple of small clips that I had from the movie talking about how it paralleled what J.P. Morgan was doing, bank runs and other things like that were manufactured. That is covered under fair use. And there was a lot of other content that I had there that didn't come from the movie. I had another clip where they were talking about salary amounts and house prices and stuff like that. I attributed that massive change, that laughable amounts of money that they were making, and the absurdly low amounts that they were paying for houses. I attributed that to the inflation created by the Federal Reserve. And they took that down. Where did I get those clips? I got those clips from the entire movie that had been up on YouTube for years, had like 1 million views on it, and was still, the entire movie was up. I took a clip here and a clip there, intermixed it in with my commentary about the Federal Reserve, and then they took the video down, claiming that it was a copyright violation. Clearly, there's something else going on here. And that's the way it goes with this. So again, they're setting up this public-private control system. That's Marsha Blackburn. Let me just say, when you're talking about a public-private control system, you're talking about fascism, by definition, the merger of public and private. And so that is concerning. The other part of it is that Trump, meanwhile, the White House, they put out their own AI framework to push age verification and ID mandates. They want to know everything about everybody. You cannot have anything that is private or anonymous. Destruction of all privacy. And they have the audacity to send J.D. Vance to Europe and complain about their censorship. That's what AI is going to be used for. Massive Big Brother. Thank you for joining us. Have a good day. The Common Man. They created Common Core to dumb down our children. They created Common Past to track and control us. Their Commons Project, to make sure the commoners own nothing, and the communist future. They see the common man as simple, unsophisticated, ordinary. But each of us has worth and dignity, created in the image of God. That is what we have in common. That is what they want to take away. Their most powerful weapons are isolation, deception, intimidation. They desire to know everything about us while they hide everything from us. It's time to turn that around and expose what they want to hide. Please share the information and links you'll find at thedavidknightshow.com. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. If you can't support us financially, please keep us in your prayers. thedavidknightshow.com.